Shalom. Amazing for me to be here in Australia. It's my third time. I always love to come back here. Not just a beautiful country, I think it's the only country I would be able to live outside of Israel. And somehow, amazingly, I'm just talking about this in the car with Mark, that it's from its population, Australia is a small country, but the influence the churches have here globally is unbelievable for, especially for us living in the Middle East. Australia is at the end of the earth. So, so I'm glad to be here. And after we've toured together the land, and he mentioned it, Mark, that English is not my first language, so I hope you understand me. Why German and Hebrew? So my father is Israeli, Jewish, and my mom is Swiss Christian. And my mom grew up Catholic, but in her 20s she came to faith. And right away what she wanted to do to strengthen her faith, to go to the Holy Land. So we went to the Holy Land, and my future grandma happened to be the maid in the hotel. So I invited my grandma for Shabbat dinner. That's something I want to present to you today. And at the Shabbat dinner, when cleaning the dishes, she asked my mom, which one of my sons do you want? So it was not a usual thing in Switzerland that you're asked, but in Israel that's regularly. But special and unique that even today it would be taboo, but 40 years ago that the Jewish mom would want her son to marry a Christian. So, and somehow, thanks God, but my grandma was, prior to the establishment of the State of Israel, in the British Mandate time of Palestine, she was sent with her sisters to a Christian Anglican school in Jerusalem. So she knew when my father gets married to a Christian, he will be happy for the rest of his life, and he really is. Anyway, but that was unique. It's taboo today. It's my wife is Dutch, and when people realize that she's not Jewish, it's right away, oh, how does that work? And then it's always a good way for me to get into the important things in life. So I grew up in Switzerland, going with my mom to a Swiss Pentecostal church. And my father, not because he didn't believe or he was against, but it was a little bit weird for him as an Israeli Jew to join a Swiss Pentecostal church, because, being charismatic and Swiss somehow doesn't fit together. Anyway, I went with my mom, my brother, and me. We went to church, so we grew up with believing in Jesus. On the other hand, for my father, he wasn't religious Jewish, but he was very important for him to do some traditions, especially celebrating the feasts. And on every Friday evening, I don't think we've missed ever a Friday evening having the Sabbath meal together, thanking God for the week and going into the Sabbath. Religious Jews don't drive on Sabbath. They have a lot of laws to not do on Sabbath. My father didn't keep them. He took us always, every Sabbath, he did some activity with us. And it's something that I took as well over for my children. It's just, for him it was important, not exactly the laws, but the thing of having one day set apart to spend as a family and to spend as well with God. But the problem for me was in Switzerland that my congregation didn't want to know anything about their Jewish roots or Jesus as a Jew. And they didn't want to know anything about Israel. It wasn't important, because everything was, in my perspective, over-spiritualized and disconnected from its roots. On the other hand, I had a Jewish identity from my father, but I couldn't connect it with Jesus, because I had Jesus presented me through a Swiss Pentecostal church. On the other hand, I had kind of, our roots in believing in Jesus presented through traditional Judaism, and I couldn't connect these things. So, and these struggles and not being able to ask questions in my church, and I'm a person that I hardly, rarely something touches my heart if it doesn't go through my brain. I really need to understand it, that I'm moved by it, or that I'm, getting emotional about it. So I was asking too many questions in church, and that disconnected me. And my father couldn't give me always an answer because he just didn't know. He didn't study in a religious school or anything. But so I struggled with my identity, with my faith, and that's kind of happened that I left everything. And I lived my life very, with the age of 15, 16, and I wanted to discover the world. And it happened that at one point I was 18, and I went out with friends to a club. And I remember that day, it was the 1st of July, 2001. I came back at 2 a.m. from a nightclub, and I turned on the television. I couldn't sleep, and I see there was a bomb attack in Tel Aviv. It was a suicide bomber entering a nightclub in Tel Aviv, and it was the worst terror attack in Israel's history. Over 20 young people died and over 200 wounded. And at that moment, something struck me, because I felt like, I've just been like those in a nightclub, but my life is somehow a golden cage. No values, I have no mission. I don't think there's anything that I could really fight for. And at one moment, I decided, as my cousins in Israel were all in elite units in the army, and one was heavily wounded, I really felt like I need to go to Israel to serve in the army. Not out of hate or revenge to the Palestinians, it's just I felt like I have no foundation in my life. And I had to make up a mission for myself. The next day I told my parents, I told my mom. My mom was just quiet and saying, if that is really what God wants you to do, so I release you for this. My father was very happy because he knew what's going to happen to me, and that the army will reach with me whatever he couldn't do. So I left to Israel, and I was very proud. I thought that the hero from Switzerland going to come and rescue Israel from all its misery. And I'm now 17 years in this country, and I've never got a thank you for it. They just told me, you're a Swiss, spoiled little boy. You should go back. We don't really need you there. And the army gave me much more than I could give my country. So it shaped my life. It shaped my faith together. I wanted to give everything, and I went into an elite unit, and they chose me to become a sniper. So my position was very, harsh and problematic in some perspective. I had situation that I thank God up until today that He made me make the right decision, because some of my friends didn't do it, and some of my friends lost themselves in a way as well, in post-trauma and all kind of situation. We had situations in the army that especially a Swiss person could never imagine. A situation where it can't get worse in life, and on a weekly basis that you almost lose your life. Friends of mine who died in front of me, and the worst situation was we were surrounding a house, and on the other corner I see my officer with 3 soldiers, and a grenade shot out of the window on them, and my personal officer that I so looked up to jumped on this grenade. He had 2 seconds to decide to rescue the life of his 3 soldiers he is responsible for. So situation that is so hard to really deal with. And I felt so bad for my friends who didn't have faith in God in order to speak about this with God, because you had nobody else to speak about. You couldn't speak with your friends about this situation. You're not allowed to speak to anybody else outside your small unit of 12 soldiers. You can't process this. Only time you could maybe ask for a psychologist of the army itself, of your own unit, but and that's not what helped me. But I think there wasn't a time in my life where I prayed so much, and I really got a strong relationship and back on track in my life in the army, and then after the army, I didn't know what to do. Israel is a complicated country, and it's very hard to succeed, especially as a new immigrant. Your language is not perfect. You don't know to fight, especially as a Swiss. I always said in the army, for everything I wanted, I said, please, please, please. Until I realized that I had 20 officers. All my colleagues became my commanders. At the moment, I didn't ask for please anymore. It worked better. But you need to fight for everything and to position yourself. And it was very hard for me. And to succeed in this country is not easy. So I didn't really know what do I do to really make my living. At the age of 18, I earned about 6,000 Australian dollars a month in Switzerland. And in the army, 100 a month. But then, how do you always compare it to Switzerland? Always compare it to the wealth? And what do you do? How do you succeed? And my mom came to me and said, you should become a tour guide and lead groups to Israel. I said, what? I was never interested in any history. I was arguing with friends and teachers in Switzerland about the political situation in Israel. But, I wasn't a history nerd. I was good in finances. That was my strong part in my education in Switzerland. But my mom wanted me to become a tour guide. So I said, oh, man, you never listen to your mom. At least do it now. And it was the best decision I've done. I always say my mom is Christian, so I'm a tour guide. Would my mom be Jewish, I would be a lawyer today, probably. And I felt like that I really, through being a tour guide, I could really, bring my experience, my journey with God and Jesus to others. And especially like those who I grew up with in my church, I could reach what my mom wasn't able to reach in her church and was her life frustration. She probably wanted me to reach what she wasn't able to do. And so living in Israel, and I remember I was in my tent in the army, and very depressed and frustrated about the situation, and I was reading my Bible in German. So I had, Old and New Testament Bible, and it was clear, but my friends didn't realize it. But I had a believer in my unit at the beginning, and he realized that I'm reading the Old and New Testament. He was the one that understood it. So we had our two-man fellowship in our tent, and people were wondering what we are doing, and that was kind of exactly at the right time. I had the right friend to really grow in faith. And through this experience, the geography, you learn every little corner of the country in the army. You learn that the biblical text, because as well, the army wants to connect you and give you reasons why you are there. So they use education to, that you're able as well, and you believe in what you do. And that I really wanted to, to spread through my job. And what I would like to do is give you two examples how, for me in my life, everything make more sense. Going to Israel, living there, going through this experience. And I want to give you two examples of how I was able to understand Jesus better. I was able to understand and as well going into a deeper connection with him, living in the land and learning about the land. and about the Jewish heritage. So I want to give you two examples, and it's about memory. Yeah? Memory. The most important thing in Jewish tradition is memory. I don't think there's one people who are more specialists in commemorating things. Yeah? The Armenians are knocking on Israel's door all the time to teach them how to commemorate the Armenian genocide. Israel has, some of you have been, you might have been in the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. It's an institution that is the world #1 of commemorating a tragedy. So millions of donations come in just to keep that alive and to keep alive the memory of the 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust. We just last week we had a Holocaust Memorial Day, and so a father and a girl challenged the big institution of Yad Vashem commemorating the Holocaust, because this girl was reading a book of a young girl called Eva, and she wrote a memorial in the Holocaust, and her memorial ended up when she entered the trains to Auschwitz, because then she died. So she was so moved, this girl, by this real story of Eva. So her father had money. He put in $9 million to commemorate Eva's story and bring it to the younger generation. So how did he do it? He made a movie, and in this movie it's like Eva had Instagram. So you can follow it on eva.story. And even the White House shared it. And 100 million people followed Eva's story. So it's the father giving $9 million just to commemorating her story, to remember her. It's so deep in our culture, because if we don't commemorate the ones who fought for us, the ones who suffered for us, we won't be able to live in a country on our own. Yeah? And how we honor the past, it will shape in our future. So that's the other thing. I mean, the Holocaust, and next week we commemorate the soldiers, then Independence Day, and we have Passover, the biblical feast, and I've heard you just had a Passover meal. And what do we remember at the Passover? Egypt. Yeah, it's even everywhere. And as well on the Sabbath ceremony, every moment, every daily prayer in Judaism is remembering the exodus of Egypt. And the Bible even writes in the prophets that there will be one day that you'll not remember Egypt anymore. You'll remember the miracles that I do today and bring the people of Israel back to its homeland. But we're not yet there. We're still commemorating Egypt, the exodus of Egypt, and every moment. Yeah, and all about Passover is about Egypt and Jesus. Yeah, and I want to now give you two other examples how Jesus is using the mind of the Jewish people he talked to make the points, to make it clear. What is the reason he came? Why should we get baptized? Why should we remember him? And this commandment he gives us at the Last Supper to remember him. And what does it mean from a Jewish perspective to remember him? And in that I want to go with you. So when we were with the tour, we were as well passing by a site, and I want to show you some pictures of this site. Is it possible? Yeah. So you see here a little creek. It's the biggest river in Israel. Here it's a little side creek, but that's the Jordan River. That's the Jordan River. On the other side you see Jordan. That's the state of Jordan. On our side is Israel. So the Jordan River is kind of the border. And this site is where thousands of tourists come and visit this site, because that is the site that the Arabs, taking the tradition over from the Jews, called this place up until today Kasser el Yehud, and it means the crossing of the Jews. Yeah. So this place is seen for probably over 3,000 years, more than 3,000 years, as the place where the Israelites crossed the Jordan River from captivity to freedom, from the desert to the promised land. And somehow exactly this place is the baptism site of Jesus. Yeah. On the Jordanian side, you have Mount Nebo, where Moses was able to see the promised land before he died. He couldn't cross the Jordan, so Joshua crosses the Jordan, and God asks them, put a pile of stone to remember what I've done for you. Yeah, so they had to commemorate the place, to always remember the miracle of the Exodus of Egypt. That's why I believe as well that probably because of that, it's still the correct place. Because God had a reason why telling them to put a pile of stone there. And exactly probably that place, John chooses to baptize Jesus. Yeah? From captivity to freedom. Yeah? And I think if you look at your life before Jesus, it's probably captivity. Yeah? Slaves, all kind of other things. And into the promise with Jesus to start a new life. And that is fruitful. And we know how fruitful the land of Israel was when the spies came to visit. So we have here the ultimative location to remember the Exodus of Egypt. And Jesus is baptized here to come and step into this memory of Egypt. Yeah? To remember him, not Egypt anymore. Yeah? He needs to be remembered. So if we go, there's another picture that I have with a map. I would like to go to that. That not even history, now I spoke about history of the place, the Israelites, but even the geography gives us a hint of the meaning of this place. So the baptism site is about here. This is the Dead Sea and the Jordan River flowing into the Dead Sea. If you look at here, on the top there's a little lake, a round white dot, that's the Sea of Galilee. From the Sea of Galilee, the water flows from an elevation of minus 200 at the Sea of Galilee to minus 424 at the Dead Sea. So to the lowest place on earth. So sweet water from the Sea of Galilee flows to the Dead Sea, that is a sea without life. 10% more salt than the Mediterranean or the Pacific. No fish, nothing in there. Here is Mount Nebo, and here is Jericho. Here's Jerusalem, and here's Jericho. So crossing, we know as well that Jericho is the first city they conquered. Jericho is the first city at the Exodus of Egypt, the first location where by archaeology it's confirmed is Jericho. It's 100% Jericho. Ancient Jericho is there. So it makes sense that it was here, that they crossed here. And then Jesus getting baptized here at the lowest place on earth. There's no place on the whole planet that is lower than this place. And sweet water flowing into that water. If you miss that place, you're dead. Yeah? Where sweet turns into salt. And at the lowest place, you cannot go deeper than that. And if you're baptized by Jesus, topographically, you can just go on the top of the mountain, and what is here? Jerusalem. Yeah, even the geography is telling us the spiritual aspect and the meaning of baptism. If you're not missing this point, or you're not reaching the point of no return, and you don't end up in the Dead Sea, and you get baptized and you follow Jesus, it can only go up to heavenly Jerusalem. So that is how coming to the land and learning about the land, history and geography and everything makes just so much more sense to what Jesus wants us to do and how he wants us to follow him. The other thing is now, besides this aspect, I would like to give you an example by the tradition that there are in Judaism. What I want to do with you is the blessing on Sabbath evening that I grew up with. Every Friday we did it, but I've never could really connect it with Jesus. And it didn't really make sense to me. Why do I need all the time to make this thing? And sometimes my father even did it, not even meaning what he's saying, and it just became a tradition. But tradition as well keeps our identity. Yeah. Communion is based on this. Yes. Jesus blessed the wine and the bread every Friday evening. On Passover, it's the long version of that tradition. So when he did the Last Supper, the disciples of Jesus knew what the bread means and what the wine means. And Jesus gives a new meaning. So what I would like to do with you is show you how it probably has been celebrated. Not exactly, we don't know exactly historical, but what are the meanings probably prior to Jesus changing it at the Last Supper. And that, I think, makes us understand much more what it means then as well to remember him. So we have bread and wine. Yeah, you're familiar with it. We have candles. I'm not sure if the candles were back then 2,000 years ago. It was part of the ceremony, but it was mainly probably because in the time of persecution in Europe where this tradition was added. And we have water. Now I'm doing tradition. Yeah, and I'm kind of following what I should do according to the law. So it's not that I don't want to tell you to keep the Sabbath. I don't want to tell you to do this. I just want to give you the source and a hint what it means. I believe that we should set a day apart, as God tells us. Yeah, it doesn't need to be the Saturday exactly. It can be any day. But if we give one day a week to God, we'll have a healthy life. It's God created the world in 6 days and he rested on the seventh, not because he needs to rest. It's because to teach us to rest one day and dedicate it to him. Many times, and I feel I do, I follow God's calling. But sometimes when you follow God's calling, when you're involved in church or in ministry or whatever, you sometimes miss out to really give him a day, a week. And sometimes it's good even to do that without a phone, without a computer. And really disconnect from earthly world and really have the ability to invest in what is important, in God and the family. And you will not hear God, I believe, if you don't give him this time and you set apart this day and you don't get further instruction for your calling, and you might drift away to something that is not really his will. So we have the bread and wine, and that's how it happens, especially as well to show it to the kids. But I want to say Judaism has a lot of laws, 613. Not all of them are relevant anymore because some of them have to do with the temple, but 613 laws. We cannot keep all of them. But it gives us walls in life. Walls are limiting, but as well protecting. And it's always a question when you have all these laws. When I go back into Jesus' time where people had this law, Jesus followed this law. His disciples followed this law. What is then more important? The 613 laws I should do to honor God, or to honor my neighbor. Yeah? The 10 Commandments, 5 of them are between us and God. The first 5 are between us and God. The second 5 between us and our neighbor. The 5th one that is still on the side to honor God is to honor your parents. So honoring your parents is like honoring God. It's not your neighbor. Anyway, but this is what is more important, the first 5 or the second 5? To worship God in church or here on stage, or to be good to your... What is more important? And Jesus gives us the answer. It's always a question in Judaism. What is more important? Can I do this? Bless God, bless the wine and the bread, thank God for what He done for us. If I just had a fight with my wife. So can I worship Him? Can I sing a song to worship Him? If we just had a... Can I have communion if something is not cleaned up in my backyard? So it's not an easy question. It's always what we deal with day by day. So I always, every Friday evening, I don't, not preaching, that I'm... Sometimes I feel like I'm preaching things that I should do more by myself. But well, at least it inspires me back then. Every Friday evening, I ask my wife, are we okay? Am I okay? That we enter the Shabbat and can really say Shabbat Shalom, the Shabbat of peace. Peace, not an absence of war, but peace as well. Shalom means fulfilled and complete. So I'll make sure that all is good, and then we do the ceremony. Try to involve our kids. We have a almost 3- and 5-year-old. Try to involve them as much as possible. So we have the bread, and you see here 2 pieces of bread, and we have wine or grape juice. And we fill it up and let it overflow with water. Sorry for the cleaning. And it's sometimes, we need visuals, but it's very helpful for the kids to bring a message to the next generation. We have 2 breads, symbolically to remember the exodus of Egypt, again, and the man. So we got the man every day. Just on Friday, we got it twice. God wanted to tell the people of Israel, you don't need to take care of any other days. I'm here for you. I'm taking care of you. I have a plan, and I will bring it to its fulfillment. And you don't need to care about all these details. And if you have food the next day, just on Friday, be prepared for the Sabbath, to not deal with anything else. And that's why 2, one for Friday and one for the Sabbath. And then we have the wine that is seen as coming from the grapes, and grapes, the people of Israel, connected to the land of Israel. So it kind of symbolizes us and the water, the purity of God, making our life overflow. So if we live with God, we'll get more than we need. Our life will overflow with whatever we need in life. And then usually the wife is lighting 2 candles, probably a later tradition. But it's because that's the last thing she does when she finished prepare the meal. I'm cooking as well. It's not always my wife. It's just to explain it. But that's the last thing she does before entering the Shabbat, and she says a blessing. I will say it now, and then what the woman is doing. She is praying for the family, to keep the family together, to keep the peace together, and for everybody. So I'll say a blessing in Hebrew, and then take some seconds to pray for our families. I'm 2 weeks away, so I'll very much miss them. So I'll do that together with you. So. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו, מצוותיו וציוונו להדליק נר של שבת. And I say the blessing over the wine and bread. And again, the whole text is a text that probably hasn't been like this exactly at Jesus' time. It was put together later, but probably involved some of the things already said back at Jesus' time. Because we know it was always about remembering Egypt and the Exodus. יום השישי, ויכלו השמיים וארץ וכל צבאם, וחל אלוהים ביום השביעי מלאכתו אשר עשה, וישבות ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה, ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי ויקדש אותו, כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות. סברים הרנן, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם פרועי פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו ורצה בנו, ושבת קודשו באהבה ברצון החילתנו, זיכרון למעשה בראשית, תחילה למקרה קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים, כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה ברצון החילתנו, ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. And then usually our older son says then the blessing about bread. And after that, we give, we bless our children with the priestly blessing. So you dedicate a prayer time individually with each child. So yeah, now we have the bread and wine. So you heard about the meanings that probably were exactly the meanings prior to Jesus changing the meaning of bread and wine. And he says, you know, I'm the bread. I'm the one giving you whatever is needed daily. Yeah, I'm the one that fulfills your cup. My blood, accepting me as your Savior, is making it probably overflow. So that's what Jesus gives it a new meaning. And again, like here, he puts himself in the memory of Egypt. And then somehow he says, you should remember me with that, not Egypt. He didn't say not Egypt, but putting myself in his disciples' mind, that I think what they understood. Commemorating always the Exodus, and now we need to remember Jesus. But then it's the question, and for me, it's the key question. If that is a commandment we received from Jesus, and you know, it's somehow in here we want to follow God as well, what he tells us to do. It's somehow in a Jewish culture. So if he tells us to remember him, what does it mean? And I got my answer when I was in the tour guide course. Because in the tour guide course, they don't just think you're going to guide Christian groups, they think you're going to all kind of groups. So we went to a very Jewish historical site of the most important rabbi in Pharisaic Judaism. And his name is Yehuda Hanassi. He wrote the first large explanation on the Bible. And he lived in the 2nd century. And he asked his disciples, when I die, I want you to build a school above my tomb. And it was so remarkable back then because exactly the archaeologists excavated and found this rabbi's tomb. And what do they find? A theater above the tomb. So what was important, and it's not just this rabbi, but for almost every rabbi in Jewish history, as well when somebody dies, my grandfather died, or my grandmother, both, when I mention their name, I'm not allowed to mention their name without adding in Hebrew, Zichrono levracha, will his memory be blessed. Yeah? On any dead person, you speak about a dead person, that is what you need to add in the sentence. Otherwise, you're dishonoring the person. Because it's so important to be remembered as a leader, as a rabbi, because if we get a calling from God, we'll never able to reach the end. And that's many times a burnout for people who really, who really follow God's calling, because you don't get to fulfill your mission. Never. So you need a next generation, you need students, you need children to continue what you do. So it's about education of the next generation and your students, and that's what Jesus wants. He wants us to remember him. He wants us to teach and study what he taught us, and he wants us to spread the message. Spreading Jesus' message, spreading the good news is the right way to remember Jesus and that is exactly probably what his disciples understood. Wow. Yeah? They probably gathered where he raised from the dead later. Probably at where his tomb was, started the first house church. The first house church started as well in his house, in Peter's house in Capernaum, because they gathered around locations that were important for Jesus and started to study and spread the message. And traveling to Israel, you can see how the church started to grow after Jesus' time. And so I ask myself, how can I remember Jesus the best? And I think my calling and my mission is to bring people to Israel. And besides going to church and reading the Bible, that's the next thing to do to understand Jesus better. It's an additional level of understanding, and I believe going to Israel, it will be easier for you, for everybody to spread Jesus' message even better in the world. And I said to Mark and I would love to bring rabbis to all the churches I go to visit and see, that the Jew asking for memory who succeeded most is Jesus. Yeah. There's no other Jew who lived in the history that got to a little part of what Jesus reached in remembering him and spreading the message. So I thought this is my calling, to bring people to Israel, and I want to show you a little clip. It's kind of a little bit promotional, but it's not the point I want to make, because I said if I want to succeed to really spread this message to the whole world, I need to bring Hillsong to Israel. And the first time I came to Australia, after making them crazy for half a year, I got a meeting, and I had another 6 speaking engagement in small churches of maybe maximum 100 people, but I asked all of them to pray that Hillsong comes to Israel, and when we had the meeting was cancelled because somebody was sick. Anyway, we didn't have the meeting, but it happened, and now through that as well, I got to know Mark. Mark has been on a pastor's tour of the Hillsong network, and it's just making this relevant for many more. So I hope to see you in Israel one day, and I hope that with this together we can even more remember Jesus and spread his message, because there are so many that still haven't heard his name and what he did for us. Thank you so much.